About 10 years ago, we were blessed with a new canonized saint, Pope St. John the 23rd. And the more I read of Pope St. John the 23rd, the more I'm both encouraged and filled with admiration of this great saint. For who he was on the outside did not reveal the struggles he underwent on the inside, struggles that continued throughout his life. Not that there was some dark, insidious demon that tormented him day and night, not at all. In fact, he had indeed, as has been widely acknowledged, a generous heart and a sincere desire to do God's will. But in his inner room, if you will, in that part of his soul that only he and God could enter, he acknowledged that throughout most of his life he battled, and these are my words, not his, what I call ordinary demons, if I may put it that way. The ordinary demons of self-love and pride, demons that do not attack from without, but who are rather those selfish desires that spring from within our fallen human nature, those things that we all suffer from and are tempted by. And I find that Pope St. John the 23rd struggles very encouraging in this sense. So often we put saints on a pedestal. We see them as special and somehow above the fray of ordinary life. And of course, in one sense, we're absolutely right. We rightly do honor them. They are indeed special. And in many ways, they are larger than life. But we do ourselves and those same saints a disservice when we go too far in this regard, treating them like porcelain dolls that must be carefully put into a china cabinet and locked away lest they break through the rough and tumble of ordinary life. And in some of the older stories written about saints' lives, it did indeed seem they were brought up on a different planet, that being holy came easy for them. But really, it was the extremely rare case when the saints did not continue to struggle with imperfections, temptations, and character flaws, just like you and I do, right up until the end of their lives. All the saints, those who were martyrs and those who weren't, lived lives in which they experienced all the joys, sorrows, irritations, and tragedies we do. They struggled with temptations, sin, opposition, and persecution. And they relied on the same grace from God that we do. And by that grace, they were sanctified. Far from being fragile or sanctity being easy for them, they refused to give up. They were tough, gritty, and determined not to compromise with their fallen human nature. St. Paul himself, you'll remember, begged the Lord 3 times to remove a thorn from his flesh, who he called a messenger from Satan, it says in the Bible, sent by God to keep Paul humble. God told Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you." So too is his grace sufficient for us. And I'm inspired and filled with admiration at Pope St. John the 23rd's perseverance and calm insistence on getting up again and again whenever he failed to exercise a particular virtue, whenever he sinned, or when he felt he failed at a task he undertook for love of God. He wrote a book called Journey of a Soul, which is essentially the daily journal he kept throughout his life. And you can't read any more than a few entries before you read words like, quote, "Well, even though I again failed in my intention to do this and such or not to do that, I resolve to do better in the future, unquote. Entries like this occurred over and over again, very often in the context of the same failure, and yet he wasn't discouraged by this. But neither was he ambivalent or lackadaisical about the failure either. He simply knew God would honor his efforts and persistence, his purity of heart, his singular focus to do God's will in all things. And God's will for him, as it is for all of us, is to fight the good fight, to pick up our cross daily till such time as he sees fit to call us home. I'd like to end with a few quotes from this great saint, and I'll read them without any commentary, for I think they speak for themselves. I consider myself wretched and miserable, but persist in my resolve to sanctify myself at all costs. People consider me calm and steady, but I have a tendency toward laziness and distraction. I will fight this vigorously. The surest way to personal sanctification is to reduce everything to utmost simplicity and tranquility. Every other way of acting is a search for personal affirmation and soon reveals itself as absurd and burdensome. As I look over my 70 years, I must admit in bitterness of soul my countless sins, offenses, and negligences. But at the same time, I cannot forget the wealth of grace and mercy Jesus has lavished upon me. And finally, at the start of my 80th year, this is what is most important: to humble myself.